Hello, and welcome to this special presentation by the Center for College and Career Readiness and the Common Core Institute. Our topic today is how to create coherence between the Common Core state standards, the initiative for observation and measurement of teacher and principal effectiveness, and the Race to the Top initiative. Can we create coherence, or do we simply devolve into chaos? My name is Kevin Baird. It's my pleasure to be your senior faculty today. That's my email. If you have questions or need other follow-up or any of the materials that I reference here, please feel free to contact me, kevin.baird@collegecareer.org. A reminder that everything that we do is about sustainable change. Today we're going to be talking about how we create a coherent vision across these three programs or initiatives: Common Core Standards, Measuring Effective Teaching, and the Race to the Top initiative, how we create one coherent vision across those three programs. As well, we need to be concerned about the integration of similar skills in each of those initiatives. We need to understand how the resources for those initiatives go together. Always, we have to consider if we are spending our money and our time and our efforts to implement any one of those three initiatives or all three of them together to ensure that our work is not wasted, that it is truly sustainable. Let's begin with the Common Core state standards, and I want to talk about several priorities that are critical. For some of you, this may be a little bit of background information, but it speaks to how we create coherence then with thinking about effective teaching and also Race to the Top. 5 priorities. Number 1, we have to measure a student's reading ability. If you do not know where each of your students read, you are lost. You cannot implement the Common Core, you cannot truly observe effective teaching, and you certainly are not implementing with fidelity the program requirements of Race to the Top. You must be measuring reading ability of every child. Number 1. Number 2, we need to understand that complex curriculum and real-world complexity is the priority for our materials. Number 3, that our instructional strategy inside of the classroom should be inquiry-based, but inquiry not just for our students, but also for our teachers. Simply put, if I'm going to be teaching about the real world, if I'm going to be thinking about and helping my students understand how to apply new knowledge in a real-world setting, I'm going to have to know what that is myself. And that means that I have to be an inquiring mind as a teacher, as an educational professional. Number 4, I need to make sure that my assessment priority is about synthesis, about bringing together a variety of different elements, a variety of different texts, a variety of different ideas, and synthesizing them together. And then lastly, I need to ensure that my professional development priorities include the development of my leadership team, my principals especially. The goal of the Common Core state standards is college and career readiness. Right now, 3/4 of the fastest growing occupations require more than a high school diploma. And yet just over half of our citizenry actually go on and get that level of education. The Common Core is designed to ensure that our students, when they leave us after the end of 12th grade, are ready to go on for job training or college, 2-year, 4-year university without remediation. And remember, everything that we do is about science and mathematics. Quality of math and science today, we rank around 9th in the proportion of young people who actually get a degree in math and science. So, if you look at the benchmarks for college readiness, these benchmarks are significantly more rigorous. They're significantly harder than our current state benchmarks. We know just about half of our kids are actually proficient in reading at those benchmarks. Only 46% of our kids nationally are proficient to the college and career readiness benchmark in mathematics, etc. So we have a ways to go. That's where this idea of rigor and complexity comes into play. And you can look at the various states. For instance, in Florida, we only have 18% of our students who are actually proficient across all 4 of those college and career readiness benchmarks. So Common Core is designed to ensure that our students are ready that they do meet those benchmarks. The measurement of effective teaching is about ensuring that we are teaching this complex curricula so that our students can meet those benchmarks. And Race to the Top is a federal initiative, was designed to make sure that we are measuring students, getting information back as to whether or not they're going to meet those benchmarks. We are implementing good curriculum, and we are measuring effective teaching and rewarding that teaching to make sure that our students meet these benchmarks. This idea, this concept of college and career readiness is the coherence vision. However, we're going to get there. A reminder that nearly 1 of every 2 students who goes to community college and 1 of every 5 students who goes to a 4-year university has to enroll in at least one remedial course. Those kids that enroll in a remedial reading course, they are 41% more likely to drop out of college. So what this is about, the coherent vision here, is ensuring that our students don't have to drop out of college, don't have to take a remedial course, and frankly are ready also for job training programs, that they're not going to drop out of job training programs either. When it comes to science and math, which is the real sore point, the real sticking point, we know that we have to begin by preparing our students to read the kinds of things that they would be reading in science and math. Those items are complex items. They are items which tend to have nonfiction, informational text, domain-specific vocabulary. The problem is that our textbooks have actually become less complex over the last 100 years. The things that we've been buying have a lower level of complexity, while the world around us has increased in complexity. And that's led to what we think of as the text gap. So, Common Core state standards are designed to ensure that our students by the end of 12th grade reach a 1300 Lexile, or a college and career ready level of reading, because students have been dealing with this complex curriculum. The measurement of effective teaching is about ensuring that our teachers are teaching reading, are helping our students accelerate their skills so they reach the ability by the end of 12th grade to actually understand, comprehend, and use complex information at that Lexile level. And Race to the Top, of course, is a federal program designed to encourage the states to implement college and career readiness initiatives so that their students reach that same benchmark. That's the coherence. A reminder, 75% of our kids in this country cannot participate in the armed services because they cannot read successfully and pass that military entrance exam. That's what you see here on this slide. And our kiddos in workplace training here in this very broad band of text, are kids that are going to be steam fitters or electricians or plumbers who are going into the trades. They are at the greatest disadvantage because they actually have to read the hardest stuff. So when we talk about college and career readiness, it isn't just the kids who are going on to Harvard or Yale. It's the kids who are going out and they're going to get a job after high school. They have to be prepared to deal with these very complex items. They have to be able to read complex text. And that's where we start. In order to understand, 1, how to implement the Common Core, 2, are you implementing the Common Core, we must understand where our kids read, and we have to understand the complexity levels of the text we are giving them in the classroom. In order to achieve college and career readiness levels of reading, my reading ability, by the end of 12th grade, I have to get on a trajectory so that by the end of the 3rd grade, for instance, I'm actually stretching up in my ability to read to a place where today I wouldn't be expected to read until 5th grade. I'm actually accelerating my ability to read by about 2 grade levels. Why? Well, it makes all the sense in the world. Vast majority of our kids who need remediation in college, they're actually coming into college 2 years behind in their reading ability. So I have to catch up. I have to get ahead by about 2 years. The only way I know who needs to get ahead, how far they have to get ahead, and how to help them get ahead is by measuring their reading ability in real time, or very frequently over the school year, and using that data and information. That's why it's priority number 1. And I would note that the word use is absolutely critical. Reading placement and progress monitoring data for reading, especially the student's ability to read nonfiction, is the only foundational measurement of college and career readiness today. You want to know if your kids are going to be able to go to college? Measure if they can read that kind of text. The thing is that research also shows that we aren't using the data that's available to us. So please prioritize. Do you have reading data to help you place kids in appropriate reading levels? Or do you have real-time progress monitoring data that tells you how your kids are reading and if they're accelerating, if that teacher is effectively teaching them to become better readers? Do your leaders, and then the teachers, but especially the leaders, understand the progress monitoring data, and are they using them? Mark Shin over at National Louis University in Illinois, he did this study. It was presented to the Virginia Department of Ed. And what he found was that even in programs where you have a high compliance issue, where essentially you have to have reading data, you have to have progress monitoring data, and you're supposed to be using it, it's not used. We have it. We've paid for it, probably paid a lot of money for it, but we're not actually using it. So I hope that you prioritize, one, getting the data, putting it on your dashboard, the dashboard that you use to manage your schools in your school district, and that you understand it and that you're actually then taking that information and making decisions about it. You have to know where your children read, and you have to know that over time, or you really cannot implement the Common Core or observe effective teaching and measure it. Now, one of the reasons why this becomes so important is because our curriculum must become more complex. Our curriculum must approach real-world levels of complexity, like this example. In this example, I have a mom and she has high heating bills, and so she decides to have some work done on her house, and she gets those bills and she's like, hey, I didn't save a lot of money. You have to figure out mathematically, did she save money? How much did she save? And was it worth it to have the work done on the house? That's real world. And by the way, that isn't just an equation on a worksheet, right? It's a real world scenario. I have to be able to read and understand and precisely reason through the complex ideas. Here's another example. This is today's type of assessment where I'm looking at greater than or less than. But the kind of assessment item, the kind of problem I should be working through in this really, I'm dealing with very foundational skills for math here. I'm looking on a number line. I'm looking at a variety of different ways to represent doubles or one-halves. And then I have to write an essay. How did you know where to place a particular number and why? How did you know it was one less than the double of? That shows that my thinking is complex. Complex thinking from complex curriculum, my ability to read is foundational. So when you're thinking about what are you buying, you must make sure that you can hold accountable the folks who are bringing to you a recommendation for curriculum, that that curriculum is real world and sufficiently complex. There is a recipe for doing this. Your units and your lessons should include 2 anchor standards in the Common Core or 2 standards for mathematical practices, and between 3 and 5 content standards. Now that's a lot of standards. It's a lot of ideas there. That's what I mean by complexity. And then you help the students understand those complex ideas by having scaffolded questions, questions that begin with just the facts, ma'am, just knowledge-based questions, and then get the students to extend their thinking, and finally to really look at new, different kinds of problems and apply that knowledge strategically. And to do that in writing and also orally, in speaking, speech, debate. You don't know it unless you can use it, and unless you can use it in a new and novel situation. That's the outcome of complexity, and that's what the Common Core is driving to. So we need to make sure if we're measuring effective teaching that the teacher is using sufficiently complex curricula, that they are leading those students through lessons and units that have all of those ideas together, and that they're using those scaffolded questions, be low, medium, and high, just the facts, applying the knowledge, and extending my thinking. Now, if you're concerned about how your kids are going to do on these new tests for the Common Core, you should also know that this is the critical issue. It's called depth of knowledge or complexity, how complex the student's interaction is with the curriculum. For English language arts, 83% are the sweet spot in terms of assessing the new English language arts standards. It's at a depth of knowledge 3, which is strategic thinking, strategic problem solving. But for math is depth of knowledge 2, and that's application of the knowledge in mathematics. You're going to want to prioritize knowing the difference between depth of knowledge 2 and depth of knowledge 3, and making sure that the stuff that you get is sufficiently complex in English language arts and meets the requirements of depth of knowledge 2 in mathematics. I will give to anyone who wants one. You have my email. I'll give a copy for your review of a guide by Dr. Karen Hess. She's on our faculty. She's a consultant out to the folks who are making the new Common Core assessments, and she is a guru in understanding depth of knowledge. Again, in understanding this complexity of interaction between the students and the curriculum. And she's created a guide for us that actually helps you to go, if you were doing classroom observations or you were doing teaching or professional development, or helps a teacher in the classroom think about activities and prompts that get at that level of complexity. It's all about complexity, my friends, and that's why you have to know where your kids read. So, some things to prioritize. Library alignment. You have to have complex materials across a broader range of readability. Call Fallout Library Services. They'll help you do that for free. You want to make sure that inside of the classroom, you go in, you're going to observe, you're going to measure effective teaching. You should be seeing multiple texts taught inside of that classroom across a range of readability levels. You need to make sure that you have video and multimedia or other real-world items that are being used in the classroom. And by the way, if you don't allow the things like YouTube to be used in the classroom, that's a real concern, because that's where the real world really, really is. And yes, I know there's inappropriate material out there on YouTube, and you know what? The kids are watching that inappropriate material on their handheld phone on the bus. So let's get over that. We can't protect kids from everything. We have a duty, obviously, to protect them from a lot of things, but you can still use a YouTube in the classroom. Real world is in the real world. Make sure there's a balance of literature and informational text, nonfiction text. I've been in classrooms where there's way too much nonfiction. We've gone way too far that way. Other classrooms where there's almost no informational text. It's supposed to be a balance, and I should be reading them together. Some of you know my example. Maybe I'm reading about Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and I have my students reading something about the ecology of the Mississippi River. Because very frankly, if Mark Twain lived on today's Mississippi River, he might have written a different Huckleberry Finn. I can read informational text, and that helps me to understand complexity, complex ideas, but it really helps me to understand complex ideas in literature. Lastly, I'm going to give you a funding rubric, and I really encourage you to read that rubric, look through it, and use it, because it is designed to help you select the kinds of things you're going to spend your federal funds on. There's a lot of people out there who want your money, and the reality is that they're going to say they're aligned to these kinds of outcomes, but they are not. Remember, local control is the power of the pocketbook. So you want to make sure, number one, buy something that lets you measure how well your kids read. 2, make sure the curriculum you buy is sufficiently complex. 3, make sure the professional development you're getting is developing your leaders and ensuring that your teachers understand what effective teaching looks like in terms of complexity and depth of knowledge. Okay? So that's a gift for you. Here's another example of complexity. Think about it in mathematics. You're out there adopting a new math curriculum. You must ensure that that math curriculum has multiple representations of the same kind of data. Here, grade 7 assessment item coming to a test near you. I'm looking at distance and time, speed. 2 of these I'm looking at a graph. 2 of them I'm looking at a chart. The question is, figure out who's going fastest, who's going slowest, and order them up. I have to be able to translate from one kind of representation to the other. That's the definition of complex thinking. In mathematics, it's really all about selecting the right problems. That's what the Common Core would have you do. Make sure you're selecting the right problems. I call them texty, sexy problems. They're real-world problems. They're problems that have words in them that describe complex scenarios. You want to make sure that the stuff you're buying has those kinds of problems, and that, as you are looking at effective teaching, you're actually observing whether or not teachers are using those problems. And if you're getting low math scores back from your student data, you should be looking at what's actually happening in that classroom to those complex questions. Are we having discussions? Are we actually understanding the question first and then moving into instruction, etc.? Writing, writing, writing. Another priority relative to the Common Core and to effective teaching. Remember that we know one of the most critical elements for college and career readiness is the ability to write, and we should all be scared about this. The writing scores on the most recent SATs, the lowest ever. Okay, so the NAEP in 2011 told us how to ensure that our students could become proficient in writing. And we have a lot of students that need to become proficient in writing because only 27% of American students after 6th grade were actually proficient in the act of writing. So what do? We can establish these guidelines via policy. Leaders can establish these guidelines, or we can simply make them a priority. Number 1, write 4 to 5 pages every single week to an authentic audience, something that's real world, you really care about, really makes sense. Use technology to do that writing. Write on a computer. It changes how we write. And finally, use the thesaurus. Care about the words you're selecting. Be precise in your language. Be persuasive, if you will. If you do these things, if you prioritize these elements, you will implement the Common Core very well. Now, you need to ensure, as you're measuring effective teaching, that you are measuring the effective teaching of writing. And here I've just given you a rubric for that. If you do those things, you will also be implementing to the goals of Race to the Top, which is college and career readiness, okay? What's holding us back? I mean, really, and by the way, the Common Core does not ask for this level of rigor. If you are looking at localizing the Common Core, making your own standards in your own district, this is a very good place to go above and beyond what the Common Core requires so your standards are even more rigorous. And here's an example of that. How do I do analysis? How do I get at complexity and critical thinking? That's the key to the Common Core. It's also one of the keys for effective teaching. You can see here I have an assessment question coming to a test near you. Susie's organizing the printing of tickets. She can buy tickets from SurePrint, or she can buy tickets from Best Print. Where's she going to go? Figure it out. Write out your answer. Write out an essay. Show your good complex thinking. Writing is how I actually communicate my thoughts and my understanding. So that's the Common Core. Those are the critical priorities. Know where your kids read. You have to know where your kids read on a constant basis. Make sure that you're buying the right kinds of complex materials that include the real world. Make sure that your teachers are focused on writing appropriately and adequately. These are the critical elements, and make sure it's all about the real world and application. Depth of knowledge 3 in English language arts, depth of knowledge 2 in mathematics. Management should be able to tell you, the management of the building should be able to tell you the difference between depth of knowledge 2 and depth of knowledge 3. Because you see, it's that principle, it's that management team at the buildings that actually have to go in and observe and measure effective teaching and leadership. So let's look at that for coherence. At the end of the day, the ability to teach with real-world complexity is the key to being an effective teacher. That's the new thing. That's the thing we have to look at. So I'm going to give you some new information. I'll also send along these resources so you can read them yourself. I want you to understand that no matter if you're using the Marzano model or the Danielson model or the Strong model for evaluating teachers and observing them, at the basis, the foundation of effective teaching are the model core teaching standards. Now, these are standards that were developed by the states, not by the federal government, but by the states and by teachers that describe what teachers should be able to do, what defines effective teaching. Let's take a look. So the following elements are all foundational to effective teaching models. So number 1, when you think about the student, the learner, and learning, effective teaching is defined by the ability of the teacher to, 1, understand how their students, how their learners actually grow and develop so they know how to teach them. The teacher needs to understand differences in learning and how to address those differences, how to differentiate their instruction, and they need to understand what a good learning environment is and to create that good learning environment. In other words, know thy students. By the way, this is critical inside of the Common Core because in the Common Core we're looking at a wider variety of reading abilities, and I need to understand the differences in reading ability because I have that data, right? And then I need to know what to do about it, how to provide differentiated instruction for reading. So Effective teaching qualities and criteria, absolutely essential for implementation of the Common Core. Know thy students. Next, when it comes to content, I have to have content knowledge. And by the way, very, very concerned about this, in part because of the real world requirements now. If I'm looking at implementing complex curriculum that has a real world tie-in, that's really about applying this knowledge that I'm learning to the real world, I have to know about the real world. I have to be keeping up in my discipline. If I'm teaching science, I have to be actually reading science journals, keeping up with it, understanding it. In mathematics, I'll give you an example. There's a new report out by the National Research Council. You're welcome to have a copy if you'd like. You can email me. And what it says is that, we used to think about math as being, just addition, subtraction, multiplication. It is, right? Math is math is math. That's not true. There are so many innovations that have been happening in the mathematical sciences. As a matter of fact, the chief economist at Google says that their number one job is statistics, a statistician, because of all of the things you have to do and all of the ways that math is applied to these really big jumbo search engines and data sets. So you have to have good content knowledge, and you have to be able to apply that content to connect those concepts to the real world, especially engaging learners in critical thinking and creativity and collaborative problem solving, which, by the way, critical thinking and creativity and collaborative problem solving are at the foundation of the Common Core state standards requirements. And here you see there's the foundation of the standards for effective teaching. So teachers must know their students and must know the content and its use today, its real world use today. When it comes to instructional practice, actually teaching that content, I better be assessing on a constant basis how my kids are doing and using that information to plan for instruction and actually differentiate to make sure the students are moving forward as fast as they can, getting exactly what they need. And I should then be able to use different instructional strategies depending on the data. This goes right back to my first priority. You have to know where your kids read, use that information about how well your kids are reading, bring it back to your instructional planning, and how you determine which strategy to use. Use data to plan and execute. That's key. And again, for our leadership, we have to make sure that we understand these strategies, we understand the data, we're using it as well. The last area here in the in-task standards, which again describe effective teaching, they were developed by teachers for teachers within the states. Professional responsibility, professional learning and ethical practice, and leadership and collaboration. Now here's a little danger, Will Robinson, because in these new measurement tools, observing our teachers and whether or not they're being effective, in order to get the highest rating, you have to become a leader. Well, what does that mean? I'm going to give you some criteria for that, what that means. And that criteria is based upon the ideas of complexity and real-world content. If you are a leader, if you are engaging in professional learning, that means you're keeping up with your discipline. You're learning about new developments in the real world. You're bringing them to bear in your classroom. You're creating new course materials and new course outlines and new curriculum on the fly as you're learning about the real world outside. You are an inquiry-based educator, right? Inquiring minds want to know. And then you're taking what you've learned and you're sharing it with your colleagues, your other teachers, your leadership team. That's what it means to engage in professional learning and be a leader, collaborating. Learn yourself, lead, be responsible. Be responsible for the success of your students or their failure, and team up. And by the way, the district shouldn't have to pay you for that. That being a professional means that you are engaged in your own career and you go out and learn those things on your own time because inquiring minds want to know. Now, I also want you to understand that while we have these standards for effective teaching, the in-task standards, and they are foundational to all of those effective teaching measurement models, we also have a new set of standards and actually a new accrediting body for education programs that prepare new teachers. So, the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation, or CAEP, C-A-E-P, is new. It's the fusion of two previous organizations, the National Council for Accreditation of Teacher Ed and the Teacher Education Accreditation Council. And they've come together and formed one group, and that group is responsible for actually accrediting higher ed programs at college and university that are teaching our new teachers. And actually, they just in June of 2013 have agreed on those new standards. I can send you the draft standards if you'd like. Where did those standards for new teachers, for teacher preparation, come from? Well, they came from the National Research Council, they came from the Blue Ribbon Panel on Clinical Preparation of Teachers, and they came from the Common Core State Standards and the InTask Standards. So now our new teachers, if they're going to be in an accredited higher ed program, are going to be learning about the Common Core, how to implement the Common Core, how to teach to it, and those elements will be defined as what effective teaching is, okay? So, consensus actually represents a kind of coherence. Consensus that our teachers are going to be expected to implement curriculum that has this level of complexity and is rooted inside of the real world. Are our teachers continually expected to sharpen the skills in their domain? It's an absolutely critical question, because if the answer is no, then we are not reaching that level of effective teaching. Do our teachers understand new research in learning sciences, and are they teaching to the real world? And again, it's not just our teachers, it's our leaders. You know, somewhere in some state, some teacher is going to lose their job because they were judged against these standards to not being an effective teacher. If we as leaders, and I'm especially talking about building leaders, can't be on the stand in the courtroom and speak with very, very precise language about what we were looking for, what we were observing, what we didn't observe, and why we rated that teacher as being less effective. If we can't do that, we are sunk. That means that we have to have a deep understanding, back to sustainability, right? And we have to have coherence so that we are building a bridge from the Common Core State Standards, which are all about complex curriculum in the real world. We're building that bridge over to the measurement of effective teaching. So there are several models in how to measure effective teaching. Okay, Bob Marzano's very popular in Florida. Charlotte Danielson's being adopted in many states in the West, and Dr. Strong. Dr. Strong's actually his model is being implemented in Miami-Dade. He comes out of New Jersey. But no matter what model you're using, no matter what piece of software you're using to measure these items, the InTask standards, which I'm going to send to you as well, and the new CAPE standards for teacher preparation, they're the foundation, absolute foundation, and they're all aligned. The standards for effective teaching are aligned directly to the requirements of the Common Core State Standards. For example, if you look at the Marzano framework, this is from Orange County Public Schools in Florida. So, of course, the Marzano framework is directly aligned to those InTask standards, right? The standards we just looked at that define effective teaching. And one of the questions here, if you look at where it says Design Question 2 in the middle, Design Question 2 is about how I design instruction and deliver it when I have new information, okay? And it says in number 6, I need to make sure that I'm identifying critical information in my lesson. How do I know what's critical? Especially if I'm doing the Common Core and more complex items, more complex curriculum questions like that math question I showed you with Kevin and Shayna Johnson's mom, and she's going to outfit her house. She's going to have some work done on her house. She gets a bill. Was it cost-effective work? What not? How do I identify what information is critical? If I am a teacher, I understand the depth of knowledge. I understand the level of complexity required for that concept at the grade level. Literally, that's how I do it. So the definition of effective teaching, what kind of score I'm going to get on the Marzano scale or the Danielson scale, that score is directly tied to how well I'm implementing the Common Core. Okay, am I actually implementing at that level of complexity or depth of knowledge? There's a very important study on the measurement of effective teaching. It's actually the foundational study to understanding these items. It's called the MET project. I can send you the final report. ensuring fair and reliable measures of effective teaching. It was funded primarily by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And here are the districts that took part. For instance, Hillsborough County down in Florida participated. Now, they use a survey called the Tripod Survey, and I also want you to understand this because we are spending enormous sums of money on classroom observation using people, multiple observations. Well, what we know from the MET study, and again, they used the Tripod Survey. The Tripod Survey brought together one observation, so that would be a principal or an assistant principal or a colleague coming in and observing a teacher and making some notes, evaluating how they're doing. It had that observation. It also looked at student performance data, the data from students who had that teacher before, maybe the year before or several years before, and looking to see how those kids did. Because if the kids were doing well, and especially if they accelerated in that teacher's classroom, that meant that, hey, we're looking at effective teaching. And lastly, the MET project included student feedback. Now, this just wasn't any student feedback. This isn't student feedback saying, Mrs. Jones is mean to me. This is student feedback against questions like, are your learning objectives clear for the day? For instance, does your teacher teach differently depending on the kinds of problems that you're having? That would get to differentiation. That kind of really measured, structured student feedback, very critical. So there are some things I want to make sure that you understand that we learned from the MET study. And again, we learned from the Tripod Survey. That's the survey instrument or the evaluation instrument that they're using. It was developed up in Boston, I believe, at Harvard with these three elements. The very best models, the models that were most effective in measuring teacher performance, were those that emphasize student performance data. Reading data. How well do your students read? You want to measure effective teaching? Make sure you understand how your kids read at the beginning of the year, after the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, etc. If your kids are learning to read and accelerating their reading skills, you probably got an effective teacher on your hand. The model requirement or recommendation is actually making somewhere around 40% of the evaluation model based upon student performance data. Now, observation was widely used, but it was also the most expensive and the most variable piece. Again, just think about it. You are really opening yourselves up to litigation when you are going out, you're evaluating teaching with a variety of different evaluators, and they're coming back with different evaluations. We're spending a lot of money on training observers, working on inter-rater reliability, etc. And so things we know that if you have more than one person observing behavior, that's a good thing. We know if we have multiple observations, that's a good thing. But please do not discount, one, it's much more cost effective to use the other elements as well, and two, there's always going to be variability in having observations by other human beings. But number three, interestingly enough, that when you had structured student feedback, so these were student surveys about what was happening in the classroom, the student feedback was just as reliable and valid, just as important and impactful and as useful as the other two elements. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, the teachers actually were more supportive of, used the student feedback more diligently, and accepted student feedback more readily than the feedback they got from principals or other outside observers. Why? Well, it makes all the sense in the world. Your students are your customers. And so the teachers were much more willing and receptive, willing to listen to and receptive to the student data because they saw the students as their customers who saw them every day. So, I'm going to send you the copy of the MET study. Know that when you're thinking about from a policy standpoint or a purchasing standpoint, looking at how you measure effective teaching, please do not discount using that reading data. Do you know if your kids are reading, how they are accelerating in their reading, etc., and Know your students, right? All the way back to my standards for effective teaching, knowing my students, and differentiated instruction inside of the Common Core, getting that student feedback in a formal way and using that information to guide my professional development and teacher development. You have to know the requirements of what it is you're supposed to be teaching, the Common Core, in order to identify the behaviors of good teaching of that curriculum. That means our principals, our building leadership teams that are out there doing these observations, they have to be well educated, deeply educated about what's in those standards. Data has to be there, it has to be present, but it also must be understood. I have to know what it means, it has to be useful in a useful format, and it needs to be used. All the way back to those standards for effective teaching, obviously a core critical priority in the Common Core. And knowing students in very formal ways can inform instruction and evaluation, and getting that student feedback actually gives me relatively inexpensive information that is just as reliable and valid, and which teachers actually accept more readily about how well a teacher is doing. Now, I would also take you to another study, very important, by the Wallace Foundation, which essentially says, you know what? Good teachers begin with good leaders, good principals. The building leadership team is expected to do the classroom observations for evaluation. They're expected to coach my teachers for change and improvement. They're expected to be on the front lines for community and parent communication, and they are expected to be the instructional leaders, not just the building operators, but the instructional leaders in the building. They can't do that unless they are developed, but when they are, the Wallace Foundation and other studies have found that there is an empirical, measurable link between that school's achievement and that strong leadership. So please make sure, resting on sustainability, you want your efforts to continue. You don't want to waste money. We don't have money to waste. We have to ensure that our understanding of the Common Core and complexity and real world is then aligned, that there's a bridge to our observations for effective teaching. It all begins with the development of your building leadership team. So ask that question. Where's your Title II money going? How much of your Title II is specifically being used for the development of principals, assistant principals, coaches, and their teams? As a matter of fact, if you look at the most recent report on the condition of college and career readiness from the ACT, there are 3 critical policies and practices to increase college and career readiness. Number 1, infuse a culture of post-secondary success. Who infuses culture in our buildings? It's our leadership teams. Ensure that there is a culture that says every single child is going to be able to go pursue their dream job, whatever that may be. They're going to go to workplace training or be able to go to college. They're going to be able to afford it because they're not going to have to pay for remediation, and they're going to enjoy it, and they're not going to drop out. Making sure that we have rigorous high school courses. Again, the principal really helps to drive that, as does the district leadership team. Making sure that my curriculum in high school is aligned with and looks like the curriculum in the beginning of college. Many high-performing high schools right now are actually getting with the local community college or a university to help design courses. Not curriculum, but actually design courses where in the last 2 years of high school, students are taking college-like courses. And then the last most critical thing, the folks at the ACT also said it, I must ensure early monitoring. I have to have the data. I have to know how my students read, and I have to use it for intervention. Absolutely key. Policies and practices to increase readiness. The principal, the building leadership team, is the core critical team to develop to make sure that happens. So, we have 7 skills for building leaders. I have to know the indicators of college and career readiness. I have to know what it looks like for the grade. That means know the Common Core state standards and their progressions, know them deeply. And I have to believe, I have to create that culture that all of my students can go on and get the job that they want, can go on to college, even my students who are behind. I need to be able to then walk into a classroom to articulate that belief and to identify those instructional practices, those effective teaching practices, which we know have to do with complexity and real-world curriculum. I have to be able to model those practices well. If I can't model it, if I can't do it, I don't know it. And by the way, if I can't model it, if I can't do it, we all have a problem, because if I'm sued, I am in deep, you know what, I have a real problem, because how could I actually observe it if I can't know it, if I don't know how to do it? I need to have progress monitoring data available. I need to lead with it. I need to understand it. I need to use it, especially how well do my kids read. And I need to require that complex real-world curriculum. These are all elements which lead to sustainable implementation for change and improvement. They're also critical for both the Common Core and for the leadership of effective teachers. Okay? In a nutshell, good teachers begin with good leaders, and they teach with complexity in the real world. And they're interested in the real world. They are studying in their domain. So what about Race to the Top then? How does it fit in? Well, I think about Race to the Top as the driver that has disappeared. Now, I want to remind you that the Common Core state standards are not a federal program. The Common Core state standards were developed by the states, not by the federal government, by the states, adopted by the states. The effective teaching standards were developed by teachers in the states. They were not a federal program. They are not a federal program, but Race to the Top is. And Race to the Top was a real proponent, a real driver to help states take this step and actually move forward with Common Core and with effective teaching. You see, there are 4 assurances, there are 4 goals, there are 4 requirements for Race to the Top. 1, states that were competing for Race to the Top funds had to adopt common standards. Now, didn't say it was the Common Core standards, but let's face it, Common Core standards were the only common standards available. Said you had to participate in a common assessment consortia. Well, the only common assessment consortia out there were the Common Core standards assessment consortia, which again are being driven by the states. Okay, Race to the Top says that we have to have data systems to measure student growth and inform teachers and principals. Now, I want to note that many people get this confused. They think that the Common Core requires all of this measurement of students, all this collection of student data. They do not. The Common Core says nothing about student data. There is no requirement to collect even 1 whit of data. That is in Race to the Top. The Common Core does not require it, but Race to the Top did. Effective teaching, Race to the Top supported the recruitment, the development, and rewarding effective teachers and principals. Interestingly enough, perhaps the most important element of Race to the Top, turning around lowest achieving schools, it's the part that's actually received the least attention in many districts, because we're all about compliance, this compliance issue. We're going to implement the standards. We're going to implement effective teaching measurement, but I never really get into the depth of turning around our lowest achieving schools. And that's where the rubber hits the road. So post Race to the Top, data systems have become confused with Common Core state standards. These standards, which describe new advanced levels for college and career readiness for our kids and that are aligned to effective teaching practices, they become a concern for those who believe that we're going to collect a whole bunch of data about our kids. It's just not so. Measurement of effective teaching also becomes a compliance issue. Instead of using that information about where our teachers need help, instead we're looking at it as a compliance issue. Yes, I said what the State Department of Ed said I was supposed to do. But turning around our lowest achieving schools remains the hardest focus area and the least focused upon area. So the coherence here is that, yes, Common Core is supported by Race to the Top, and if I'm a race state, I have to be implementing it. And yes, if I'm a Race to the Top state, I have to be implementing effective teaching. But both of those things together are supposed to be driving the turnaround of our lowest achieving schools. And that doesn't necessarily mean closing those schools either. So the implementation, I'm not doing it, I'm not implementing the Common Core, and I'm not implementing effective teaching unless I'm actually doing it, which is turning around the lowest achieving schools. The same idea as I don't know the standards if I can't actually do them and model them. So what are the responsibilities at the board level, at the administration level? Well, I don't presume to tell you your responsibilities, but I'll make some suggestions, okay? Number 1, Ensure the highest standards possible. Localize your standards. Go beyond the Common Core. Require more writing. Require reading informational and literary text equally. You can go beyond and get my white paper. I've written a white paper about how to localize and create even more rigorous standards for your district. Also, ensure a complex curriculum. Now that's through purchasing. Make sure that the stuff that you're buying is sufficiently complex. Make sure that the stuff that you're buying has that real world element in it. Ensure effective leadership. Remember, you may be measuring effective teachers, but effective teachers start with effective leaders. Make sure on your own dashboard you know where your kids read, you are measuring that, you are monitoring that, and that's going to let you know if you have effective teaching and if you have effective leadership and if you are implementing the Common Core. Critical coherence. Lastly, demand instructional leadership throughout your district by practicing instructional leadership yourself. Go out and look at the schools, look at your dashboard, understand that data, participate in those discussions. Go beyond compliance to make sure that we are actually doing the work. Good questions to ask the management team is, how do you know that we're really having effective teaching? How do you know that your observations are correct? What does the data say? Are you getting student data back in some kind of formal way? Where is the data? And then go out and observe yourself. You should know from what you've already learned. You should know when you go into a classroom, you should be seeing a complex kind of problem with a real world application. You should be seeing literature and informational text. And there should be data about where those kids are reading. And the teacher should be able to tell you about that complexity and what they're doing at those different levels of reading. You know enough to be an instructional leader in your own school district. Now, I prepared a toolkit to go along with this presentation. It has a frequently asked questions document for the Common Core, lots of different documents on Common Core background. I'll give you the actual documents for those new standards for teacher preparation so that our teachers that are coming out of university are going to be familiar with and know how to teach the kinds of Common Core complex curriculum, also know how to deliver those effective teaching practices. That's the CAPE, C-A-E-P. And also, I will give you the in-task standards. These are the foundational standards, no matter what rubric or criteria you're using to measure effective teaching. And I'll give you the study at the foundation of what we know about how to measure effective teaching. So that's coming to you. Remember, this is not really about you, it's about your staff. And I know that your staff is no doubt more diverse and much more beautiful than the people on your screen right now. But the reality is that we want our staff to go from here, I call this the faces of change, to here, which is the face of support. And the way that we do that is by developing our own understandings deeply to make a coherence vision. What is our vision? Our vision is college and career readiness. We're going to have curriculum that approximates the real world, that is complex, like the real world, so our students don't have to go and get remediation when they go to college or they go into workplace training. We're going to make sure that we're teaching that curriculum right. We're going to know our students. We're going to know how to teach that curriculum. We're going to have data that shows if our students are reading and how fast they're accelerating their reading skills. All of these so that our students that come from our district will be more ready for college or for workplace training than any other students anywhere else. That's the vision. That's the support, and making sure that our staff have the tools to do that. Because you see, failure isn't an option. This work is personal for me. It's personal for me because of these kiddos. They're my own. And that's why I go out, we raise money so that we can do this work. So I'll leave you with this. If you're interested in more information, if you're interested in bringing this information to your school board, to your management team, I do that on my own at no or very little cost to you because failure isn't an option, and we have to bring a coherent vision, deep understanding of college and career readiness to each of our classrooms. If you're interested in doing that, grant information, Tim Edwards at the center, Tim Edwards at collegecareer.org. He's the guy who manages our grant funds and programs. Please get a hold of him and we will get myself or someone out to you so you can actually study these elements in depth. Tim Edwards at collegecareer.org. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure and an honor to be with you over this series of conversations, making sure, hopefully being helpful to you as you dive in and understand what the Common Core, what measurement of effective teaching, what Race to the Top is all about. I'm Kevin Baird, kevin.baird@collegecareer.org. Thank you so much and take care. Bye-bye.